She was a quiet one, the faithful one, the one who stayed when others would have run. For decades, Jessie Coulter was painted as the angel beside the outlaw, a gospel heart tangled with a man determined to burn every bridge. But now, at 82, she's rewriting the story. In a moment no one expected, Jessie whispered a sentence that sent shock waves through her family. He left something under the floorboards, and I never told a soul. The story she's held inside for over 40 years, of love, torment, and one night that changed everything, is finally coming out. It's not about fame. It's not about songs. It's about what really happened behind closed doors and what Waylon Jennings made a promise never to reveal. For the first time, Jessie Coulter is ready to break that promise. And by the end of this video, the secret she's carrying could change everything we thought we knew about country music's most legendary couple. Before Jessie Coulter became tethered to the myth of Waylon Jennings, she was simply Miriam Johnson, a preacher's daughter from Phoenix with a voice like velvet dipped in lightning. She grew up on gospel and grit, playing piano in church and dreaming of songs that would reach beyond the altar. Before Nashville, before Waylon, before the chaos, she was her own person, and for a moment, the world saw her as that. She met Duane Eddy first. Yes, that Duane Eddy, the twangy guitar legend. They married young. She toured with him, learned the music business the hard way, and eventually broke free. By the early 1970s, she had reclaimed her own name and sound, releasing I'm Jessie Coulter with a spark the country world couldn't ignore. But the spotlight she was building for herself dimmed the moment Waylon Jennings walked into her life. He was already a fireball of charisma and contradiction, magnetic, tormented, adored, and completely out of control. Jessie wasn't blind to it. She saw the pills, the whiskey, the short temper hiding behind that outlaw charm. But she also saw the man underneath, the dreamer, the poet, the broken boy pretending to be invincible, and something in her wanted to fix him. Their relationship wasn't a whirlwind, it was a storm. They fought, loved, broke apart, and came back together. He'd disappear for days, sometimes weeks, leaving her wondering if he was with another woman, or if this would be the time he didn't come back at all. And yet, she stayed, not out of fear, not out of weakness, but because she believed, perhaps naively, that her love was stronger than his demons. In 1975, Jessie had a breakout hit, I'm Not Lisa, a song about a woman living in the shadow of someone else. It was art imitating life, because even as the world sang her name, she felt like a ghost in her own story. Waylon, meanwhile, was becoming the face of outlaw country, and Jessie, despite her talent, was increasingly framed as his wife rather than a star in her own right. Friends began noticing bruises, emotional ones, maybe more, but Jessie denied it all, insisting he never laid a hand on her. Still, there was one incident in 1978 after a show in Houston that has never been publicly discussed until now. In a journal written in careful slanted script, she recalls, he looked through me like I wasn't real, like he didn't recognize me at all. What happened next, she says, is something she buried so deep it almost disappeared. But it didn't. It's still there under the floorboards, and it's where our story will return very soon. There were days Waylon wouldn't sleep, nights he wouldn't speak. The cocaine was no longer just a habit. It was a demon riding his back, whispering through his bones, blurring the line between genius and madness. Jessie would find him pacing the floor at 4 a.m, eyes bloodshot, ranting about things that made no sense. People in the walls, music no one else could hear, secret government vans following the tour bus. He was unraveling, and she was the only one still trying to sew him back together. The public saw a rebel king, a country god stomping across stages in leather and shadow. But Jessie saw something else, a man haunted by childhood shame, by fame he never really asked for, by the death of friends, by the burden of pretending to be larger than life every single night. Waylon couldn't turn it off, and worse, he didn't want to. He fed the chaos because it was the only thing louder than the pain. One night in 1981, everything cracked. They were in a motel outside of Memphis, cheap and quiet, away from the press. Jessie had been trying to get him to rest, to eat something, to just sit still long enough for the fog in his head to lift. But instead, he turned on her, not violently, but venomously, saying things she would never repeat, things that didn't sound like him at all. She later wrote that it was like watching the devil speak through the lips of someone you once loved. That night, She left the room and drove for hours with no destination, just the hum of the highway and the ache in her chest. When she came back the next morning, Wen was gone. No note, no bags, just a hole punched through the bathroom mirror and a tiny wooden box left behind on the nightstand. She didn't open it then. She didn't open it for 30 years. But when she finally did, it changed everything. The contents of that box and the message carved into its underside will be revealed later in this story. Even then, Jessie didn't leave. That was a part no one ever understood. Why didn't she walk away? Why didn't she save herself? The answer, she now admits, is heartbreaking. I thought if I left, he would die. And if he died, it would be my fault. She wasn't a victim. She wasn't a saint. She was just a woman clinging to the hope that love, even bruised and bleeding, could still be enough to pull someone back from the edge. But what she didn't know was that the edge was closer than ever, and one day it would cut through them both. The early 80s passed in a haze of neon signs, late-night shows, and whispered prayers Jessie never admitted she was saying. From the outside, they were country royalty. She still stood by his side at award shows, still smiled for the cameras, still hit the road when the bookings came. But inside the tour bus, inside the walls of their home, things were disintegrating. The man she had married, the man who once wrote her love notes in the margins of his lyric sheets, was slowly disappearing beneath the weight of addiction and paranoia. Jessie wasn't just carrying her own pain. She was carrying Wentz too, every time he collapsed. Backstage, she was the one holding his head. Every time he went missing, she was the one on the phone tracking him down. She kept a notebook hidden from everyone where she logged the places he disappeared to, the aliases he used at check-ins, the excuses he fed to his management, page after page. It was less a diary and more a map of a man who didn't want to be found. And then there were the hospital visits, the overdoses no one reported, the canceled gigs that were blamed on exhaustion. In one of the more chilling entries in her notebook, Jessie wrote, "He stopped recognizing me at night. He'd call me darling like I was just another fan he couldn't remember meeting." Her heart was breaking in slow motion over and over, and there was no one she could tell. The myth of Wen Jennings was too big, too sacred. To speak against it felt like blasphemy. But then came the baby grand. It was delivered to their home without a note, no card, just a faded inscription carved into the underside of the lid. To the one who stayed. Jessie didn't know who sent it, and Wen never acknowledged it, but she started playing again quietly at night, songs she hadn't sung in years, gospel hymns, lullabies, and slowly something in her began to come back to life. That piano became her refuge, the one place where she could still feel like Jessie and not just a shadow beside a legend. But the deeper she went into the keys, the more memories came rushing back. One in particular, locked away since the early years of their marriage, began to claw its way forward. It had something to do with a night in Tucson, with a letter Wen made her burn, with a secret he said would destroy everything if it ever got out. She thought she had forgotten it, but the piano remembered, and once that melody returned, the truth began humming just beneath her fingertips, a truth that would explain the box, the burn letter, and why, all these years later, Jessie Coulter can't sleep without the lights on. She had learned to live between two realities, one where she smiled and sang for the cameras, and another where the past haunted every quiet corner of her home. By the late 80s, Wen had started his slow climb out of addiction, but the scars he left behind didn't heal just because the drugs were gone. In fact, sobriety made some things worse. He was lucid now. He remembered more, and so did she. One night, he sat beside her at the piano. She was playing softly, humming a gospel tune when he reached out and stopped her hands mid-chord. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he whispered, "Do you remember Tucson?" Jess's blood ran cold. They hadn't spoken of that night in over 2 decades. She nodded slowly. Wen just said, "I never should have made you burn it." What it was, Jessie didn't clarify, but that night she wrote in a journal, "There's a reason I stopped singing that year. Something I saw. Something I did." That line has never been explained, not even in a memoir. But those close to her say that for years she avoided Arizona entirely. Friends who brought it up say she'd go quiet, distant, like her mind had left the room. Then in 1992, while cleaning out a closet, Jessie found something she thought was long gone, a cassette tape labeled only with a single word, Tombstone. It was in Wen's handwriting, and when she played it, her hands trembled. The voice on the tape was his, but it wasn't singing. It was confessing, rambling, crying, talking about a choice he made in 1974 that buried more than just a name. That tape was never meant to be heard, but Jessie kept it. She tucked it away in a safety deposit box along with a wooden box from the motel and a photograph of when standing outside a church with a man she'd never seen before. And under that photo, a name scribbled in faded ink. You, don't forget what we did. Years later, Jessie tried to piece it all together. She hired a private investigator, quietly off the books, to trace the name in the church. What she found led her to a desert graveyard, an unmarked plot, and a sealed court document from 1975 that had been buried under alias and bureaucracy. She never revealed what was in those documents, not to the press, not even to her closest friends. But in one interview, when asked about the greatest burden she ever carried, she said, "There's a reason I sing to God more than people now. Some things only heaven can forgive." And with that, the melody of their marriage took a darker, quieter tone, because whatever happened in Tucson, it never really stayed there. It followed them. It bled into every note she played, every lyric she wrote, and every silence she held longer than it should have lasted. By the early 2000s, Jessie Coulter had retreated into a quieter life. Publicly, she appeared serene, gracious in interviews, gentle on stage, always choosing her words with the poise of someone who had carried too many secrets for too long. But behind the soft smiles and gospel tunes, her world had grown colder. Juan was gone, and with him went the one man who knew the full weight of what they had buried together. His death in 2002 hit her like a slow-moving train, not with a scream, but with a silence so deep she found herself unable to play the piano for nearly a year. Every room in their home felt hollow. Every song sounded like a ghost. People sent flowers, wrote tributes, and hailed her as the last woman standing from the outlaw era, but none of them knew what she'd really lost. Because when Juan died, he didn't just take memories with him. He took a pact, a buried truth, and Jessie, for the first time in decades, was alone with it. A year later, she received a letter in the mail with no return address. Inside was a photocopy of the photo she had kept hidden, the one of Juan and the stranger outside the church. But this copy had something the original didn't. A second figure in the background, blurry, but unmistakably Jessie herself. Below it, a single typed line, "The truth doesn't stay dead forever." She didn't tell her son. She didn't call the police. Instead, she quietly packed a bag and disappeared for 3 days. Where she went, no one knows. When she returned, she burned her journals, all of them. Decades of pages turned to ash in the backyard fire pit. Neighbors say she stood silently over the smoke for hours. After that, something in Jessie changed. She began speaking in parables, vague stories about God's mercy, forgiveness, and the price of silence. In interviews, when asked about Juan's darker years, she'd shift focus. "He made peace with God," she'd say. "That's all that matters." But her eyes told a different story. Eyes that had seen too much, known too much, and were waiting for something, or someone. Friends noticed she started locking her piano room, kept her mail unopened for weeks, and once, during a songwriter round in Nashville, abruptly ended her set after someone in the crowd yelled, "Play something from Tombstone." Her hands shook the entire way off stage. The past, it seemed, wasn't finished with her. Whispers swirled about an unfinished song one had written, one that allegedly referenced the church, the letter, and the deal, and Jessie was left holding the last thread of a story that was never supposed to unravel. What she did with that thread would soon shock everyone. The whispers grew louder each year, past and hushed conversations between old session musicians and road crew veterans, rumors of a song one had written but never released, a final track heard only by a select few. They called it the fifth verse. Some said it was a confession, others a threat, but all agreed on one thing. Jessie Coulter had the tape. The story went that when recorded it late one night in 1989, alone in his home studio with just his voice and a guitar, it never made it onto any album, and RCA never logged the master reel. Jessie kept it hidden in a fireproof box, away from industry ears. Only one engineer claimed to have heard it, saying it left him cold for weeks, the lyrics whispering of a preacher's lie, a grave with no name, and a woman who knew too much, and that woman was Jessie. In 2010, an anonymous blogger posted a grainy audio clip. 20 seconds of what sounded like Wan's voice humming an unfamiliar melody. The post vanished within hours, but not before fans caught wind of it. Reddit threads exploded, conspiracy videos circulated, and suddenly a new generation of country fans wanted to know, what did Jessi Colter know about Wan Jennings that she'd never shared? Jessi stayed silent until 2012, during a rare public Q&A in Texas, when a young audience member asked her directly, did Wan ever record a song about Tucson? The room went still. Jessi looked down, hands folded, and said, almost too softly to hear, he recorded many things he never wanted the world to hear. She said nothing more, but the damage was done. Interest reignited. Reporters came knocking. Former bandmates gave interviews. Producers scoured archives. But the song, if it existed, remained missing. Then Jessi did the unexpected. She contacted a Nashville historian known for uncovering lost outlaw era tapes, handing him a sealed envelope with the instruction, release this after I'm gone. Inside was a letter, a story, and a USB drive. The contents have never been made public, though the historian confirmed their authenticity. When asked what was on it, he simply said, it's not a love story, it's a warning. Whatever Wan confessed in that lost song, and whatever Jessi carried in silence all these years, is now tucked away once more, waiting. Some truths don't die with the people who live them. They wait for the right chord, the right voice, and the right time to be heard. By the time Jessi Colter reached her 80s, her public appearances were rare, her interviews rarer still. But when she did emerge, it was never without purpose. In 2022, at a small private tribute in Nashville honoring the outlaw legacy, she hadn't been expected to perform, but halfway through the evening, she quietly asked to take the stage. Sitting alone at the piano, the spotlight warm on her weathered face, the room held its breath. She began with a familiar gospel tune, Storms Never Last, the song she'd once recorded with Wan. But midway through, she changed the lyrics, subtle at first, a word here, a line there, until a new verse emerged. You promised a preacher would never go back, but I still hear the shovel, the earth going black. The room froze. Songwriters leaned forward. Producers exchanged glances. It was unmistakably a reference to the rumor, Wan's unreleased song, The Secret in Tucson, The Grave with No Name. Jessi finished the song in silence. She didn't say a word and left through the back door before anyone could ask her what it meant. That performance never aired. Phones had been prohibited, but word spread fast, and in the days that followed, industry insiders began re-examining old logs, demo tapes, even Wan's discarded lyrics. One sheet surfaced with a line scribbled in the margins. She held the key, but never the map. The lie was buried where prayers overlap. It reignited the mystery. Meanwhile, Jessi made a curious move. She reached out to an old friend of Wan's, a man known in the community for dealing in vintage recording gear and outlaw memorabilia. To him, she entrusted a battered leather case. She didn't say what was inside, just looked him in the eye and said, make sure it finds the right ears when I'm gone. When pressed in a later interview about whether there were things left unsaid between her and Wan, Jessi smiled sadly and said, not unsaid, just unheard. By now, the whispers had taken on a life of their own. What exactly had happened in Tucson? Who was the man in the photograph? Why was there an unmarked grave in a church with sealed records? And what had Wan begged Jessi to burn? And what had she refused to? As her health became more fragile, fans began to realize that Jessi wasn't just a last link to Wan. She was the last person alive who knew the full story. And the deeper you looked, the more it felt like the songs, the silences, and the buried verses were all pieces of confession too heavy for one voice to carry. And still, she sang, because that was the only way she knew how to tell the truth. The final truth didn't come in a dramatic reveal, a press conference, or a best-selling memoir. It came in the form of a quietly released acoustic album. No promotion, no label, just uploaded to a little-known streaming site under Jessi Colter's real name, Miriam Johnson. The album was titled Floorboards. No liner notes, no lyrics, just 10 songs. And one of them, Track 7, was simply called Tucson. Fans who found it listened in stunned silence. The song was raw, Jessi's voice, older and lined with grief, sang not of love or heartbreak, but of secrecy and burden. The lyrics painted a picture of a desert church, a midnight confession, and a man digging into dry earth while a woman prayed under flickering lights. One line in particular stopped listeners cold. He said the bottle was empty, but the deed was done. So, we buried the truth before the morning sun. It was poetic, yes, but it wasn't abstract. It was specific, and it sent a message to everyone who had been following the mystery. Jesse had finally spoken. Within days, the song disappeared from the site, taken down, scrubbed from servers. Only a handful of people managed to download it before it vanished. But the damage, or perhaps the healing, was done. The myth was broken open. In the months that followed, a church outside of Tucson quietly underwent a renovation. According to local records, a portion of its basement was excavated due to foundation instability. No further details were released, but some locals claimed government vehicles were seen near the site. Others insisted it was just a construction crew, but once again, Jessie said nothing. Then came her final interview. Sitting on the porch of her home, sunlight cutting through tall oaks, Jessie was asked if she had any regrets. She paused for a long time before answering. I wish we had been more honest with each other, with ourselves. But when he was a haunted man, and some ghost you can't bury with songs. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. Jessie Coulter had lived through love and chaos, through silence and storms. She had stood beside one of the most powerful figures in country music and quietly protected a truth too dangerous to share in its time. And now, in her final years, she had chosen to let the pieces fall where they may. Because not all mysteries are meant to stay buried. Some are sung softly by the last voice left who remembers.